Successful people learn how to make their mind work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast. Okay, so this comes straight from Holliwell. We're going to get into some of Raymond Holliwell's work, which has been the foundation of a lot of what I have taught for the last 20 years. It's all brilliant work. And the reason that we're going into the law of thinking, because this really what leads to the idea of who you're being as a person is how we think. And if we start to understand the laws and the limitations of how we think, we can then really start to break free into the possibility of allowing ourselves to step into not only natural thought, but thought that is more aligned with the purpose of why we're here as an individual, not collectively, but as an individual. Remember, this is really about the uniqueness of yourself, right? And everybody has a very special uniqueness about them that nobody else on the planet has, that is all yours and all yours to express however you see fit. So here we go into the law of thinking by Raymond Holliwell. He says, to the average person, life is an enigma, a deep mystery, a complex, incomprehensible problem, or it appears so anyway. But it's very simple if one holds to the key. Mystery is another name for ignorance. All things are mysteries when they are not understood. But when we understand life, it is no longer appears to be mysterious. Man is a progressive being, a creature of constant growth, before whom lies an illimitable ocean of progress to be navigated and conquered only by development and the culture of his inherent powers. The progress of the individual is largely determined by his ruling mental state, because the mind is a basic factor and governing power in the entire life of a man. Attention should be given to the predominant mental state, for it will regulate the action and direction of all one's forces, faculties, and powers, the sum total of which will inevitably determine many particular experiences and one's personal fate in life. I believe it was Emerson that said, a man is what he is based on what he thinks about all day long. Now, the ruling state of mind is made up of various mental attitudes which the individual adopts towards things, events, and life in general. We would normally call that our environment. If his attitudes are broad in mind, optimistic in tone, and true to life, his predominant mental state will correspond and exhibit a highly constructive and progressive tendency. As almost all the forces of the personality function through the conscious mind in one way or another, and as the daily mental and physical acts are largely controlled by the conscious mind, it is obvious that the leading mental state will determine the direction in which the powers of the individual are to proceed. Now think about this. If his ruling mental state is upward bound, that is, aspiring, harmonious, and positive, all his forces will be directed into constructive channels. But if his state of mind is downward in tendency, that is, discordant and negative, then almost all his forces will be misdirected. Now, it's an interesting word here that he's using, misdirected. In other words, it's not hitting its target. We may have an intention that is good, but we're not controlling our thoughts in the right direction, so it's misdirected and we actually receive something back that we don't want. It is evident, therefore, that all of the factors which regulate the life and experience of man None perhaps exercise a greater influence than the ruling state of mind. Mental attitudes are the result of ideas, and these have their origin in points of view. Therefore, by seeking true and natural points of view, one may secure the best and most superior ideas, and these in turn will determine the predominating state of mind. Now, we are prone to believe more than what we see. The evidence of the senses are the only facts that some accept, but now we shall realize more and more that it is what we believe that actually determines what we shall see. In other words, believing is seeing and not the other way around. More defeats and failures are due to mental blindness than to moral deviations. If one lived only by physical sight, his world would be very small. It is said that it is said of a bug that its world is only as large as the size of the leaf on which it lives, and many times it does not live long enough to consume the whole leaf. With man, if he lived according to the senses, the largest sense he possessed would be that of sight. Thus, our whole world would extend only as far as we could see. If we believed in the testimony of our eyes, we would accept many conditions that are absolutely not true. For example, if you look down a railroad track, you will observe at a certain distance the two tracks converge at one point. But this is not true. Have you ever stood on a boardwalk and watched a ship slowly sink into the sea as it sailed away? That ship wasn't sinking. Our eyes tell us something that is absolutely not true. When you are worried over some obstacle or problem, just remind yourself that it may be purely an illusion of the senses, that it may not be true at all according to the law. Did you know that you don't even see with your eyes? Your eyes are like a pair of windows. At the back of the window, there is a reflector, and this reflector in turn forms an image of what you see and sets up a wave current. This wave current follows along thin wires called nerves. This relays the image to the back of the brain. Here at the brain, it is referred to the memory center. If the picture is a common one, our memory accepts it readily. But if we're looking upon some new picture, some new scene, our memory does not recognize it, and then we must repeat the picture over and over many times until it makes a lasting impression or image in the brain. Therefore, we do not see with our eyes, we see with our mind, and we see through our eyes. Thought is a subtle element. Although it is invisible to the physical sight, it is an actual force or substance as real as electricity, light, heat, water, or even stone. We're surrounded by a vast ocean of thought stuff through which our thoughts pass like currents of electricity or tiny streaks of light or musical waves. You can flash your thoughts from pole to pole, completely around the world many times in less than a single second. Scientists tell us that thought is compared with the speed of light. They tell us that our thoughts travel at a rate of 186,000 miles per second. Our thought travels 930,000 times faster than the sound of our voice. No other force or power in the universe yet known is as great or as quick. It is a proven fact scientifically that the mind is a battery of force, the greatest of any known element. It is an unlimited force. Your power to think is inexhaustible, yet there is not one in 1,000 who may be fully aware of the possibilities of his thought power. We're a mere babes in handling it, and we grow in understanding, and in the right use of thought, we will learn to banish our ills to establish good in every form that we may desire. It is our power to think that determines our state of living. As one is able to think, He generates a power that travels far and near, and this power sets up a radiation which becomes individual as he determines it. Our thoughts affect our welfare and often affect others we think of. The kind of thoughts we register in our memories or habitually think attracts the same kind of conditions. Now, if we take the thought of success and keep it in mind, the thought elements will be attracted, for like attracts like. We're mentally drawn to the universal thought currents of success, and these thought currents of success are existent all around us. We will physically contact minds who think along the same lines, and later such minds will be brought into our lives. Therefore, successful-minded people help success to come to them. That is how successful living is actually founded. The law of mind is in perpetual operation, and it works both ways. Persons who dwell on thoughts of failure or poverty will gravitate toward like conditions. They, in turn, will draw to them people who accept failure and poverty. On the other hand, if we can think on positive conditions, on success and plenty, and in the same manner enjoy full and plenty, what the mind holds within takes its form in our outer world. So as we think, we create. What we think about, we're creating in our life. And yes, it takes discipline to be able to change that idea. But that is the premise of what we're talking about when we're talking about the law of thinking. We're learning about how everything that we've learned so far boils right down to the way that we're thinking about it. Some think we must deal with two forces. That is, to attract good, we must do away with the bad. But this is not true. For example, if we are cold, we do not work with cold and heat alike in order to get warm. We build a fire, and as we gather around that fire, we enjoy the heat that is extended from it, and we become warm. As we build up warmth, what happens to the cold? It disappears. For cold is the absence of heat. To be warm, we give our whole thought to those things which tend to create warmth. We ignore the cold in thinking of heat and bring forth heat. Now, this is really important. You may want to listen to this several times. It's one of the most important things that I've ever read when it comes to how our thinking affects prosperity. Prosperity and poverty are not two things. They are merely two sides of one and the same thing. They are but one power, rightly or wrongly used. We cannot think of plenty and worry about unfavorable conditions that may seem apparent. We think about plenty, and as we think of it, lack, its opposite, will become absorbed or disappear. Now let me say that again. We think about plenty, and as we think of it, lack, which is its opposite, will become absorbed or disappear. All of our thoughts must be directed to the one thing which we desire in order that our desire may be fulfilled. Our method is not manipulating two powers, not dealing with good and evil, right or wrong, prosperity and poverty. But as we follow the law of good and dwell upon that which is good, we shall bring to pass all good things. The mind force is creating continually like fertile soil. Nature does not differentiate between the seed of a weed and that of a flower. She produces and causes both seeds to grow. The same energy is used for both, and so it is with the mind. The mind creates either good or bad. Your ideas determine which is to be created. A farmer who lived in Nebraska and had come from a small farm in Pennsylvania years before, never could adjust himself to using the binder, a machine that cut and ground grain. He had been accustomed to the old hand cradle and tied his grain by hand. Repeatedly he said to his friends, "That binder will get me yet." He was afraid every time he climbed upon its seat. One day, while I was there, his horses ran away with him, and he was thrown over to the reel into the machinery. Like Job, his fears came upon him. It took just a few years to bring into reality the fears that he subconsciously entertained and accepted. So, our fears can do so much to us that we should be most careful what we fear and what we worry about. The problem is that most people do not understand that they can control their fear and they can control what they worry about, because those are things that we think about. And our brain is a tool that we think with. Who's in control of the brain? We're in control of the brain. There's not an outside force that's in control of our brain. We're in control of it, and one of the greatest gifts that we can ever give ourselves is to learn how to use it and how to use it in a disciplined way. Our fears can do so much to us that we should be most careful what we fear and worry about. Years ago, when the flu epidemic was raging throughout the country and many were dying from the plague, a newspaper published an item of interest. In bold letters, the heading read, "Do not fear the flu." It was the caption of an article written by a local doctor who explained that fear was the greatest enemy of mankind and that it would have a tendency to break down a person's mental resistance and make him more susceptible to the disease. The world is realizing more and more that we dare not entertain in our minds any fear lest it come upon us. Whatever we think in our minds must grow. Why do you suppose the farmer goes out to weed his garden and works tediously to eliminate every weed? Because he knows that if he does not clean out the weeds, they will grow stronger and tougher and choke out his crop. If some condition handicaps us, perhaps a weed that must be plucked out, it is important to know that the condition is the effect that we see. It is not the true cause that we see. Dig down deep into the mental storehouse and find out what is that cause. If we cannot discern it, there are others who can. Then weed out the cause and replace it with the right kind of thought. That is, if it is fear, replace it with courage. If it is a disease thought, replace it with a healthy thought. If it is a limited thought, think thoughts of plenty. Force some issue whereby we alter the change, the trend of thought. Then as we replace the thoughts that they are weeds, they will die in their natural selves. For such weeds die from lack of cultivation. As long as we allow things to seem real to us, we're putting our energy into it. We're nurturing it and we're feeding it. We're keeping it alive. And we're putting our faith into that thing whether we like it or not. And it must naturally grow, for the law of growth is ever working to produce whatever seed we plant. In my college days, I remember how a number of us were taken on a hazing party. It was purely a fraternal affair, so we were to be initiated and branded. When they came to my friend, they told him to peel off his shirt. He was blindfolded, and they were going to brand him with the initials of the order. They branded him with a hot tallow from a burning candle. Now, you know that tallow dropping from a candle would not burn, at least it never did burn me. But my chum was so excited and nervous that he thought they were really branding his back with a hot iron. After we returned to our rooms in the dormitory, I saw on his back a perfect letter as though it had been burned with a hot iron. Man can impress his thought on the formless substance and cause the thing he thinks about to be created. My friend believed he was being burned and thought it so intently that a welt rose on his flesh, which lasted for 2 days. Man is constantly thinking. He can change his thought, but he cannot stop thinking. This thinking power flows in and through him like the very air that we breathe. Man's problems, then, is to direct his power of thinking into constructive channels of expression. It is a scientific fact that no power can act without producing some kind of an effect. And by merely thinking, we are continually producing effects. These effects register and record in our daily life. When our thoughts are aimless and imperfect, we create for ourselves pain and confusion. This is misdirected energy. Now, electric energy, when it's misdirected and uncontrolled, develops lightning, a most destructive agent. Yet the same power of lightning can be harnessed to become the most obedient and useful servant for good. The first question in our self-development is, are we controlled by our thoughts, or are we controlling our thoughts? Are we using our thoughts for gain? Are our thoughts using us for continued loss? Christ said this, "Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all things will be added." Heaven is a state of mind. Therefore, heaven is an orderly, disciplined, constructive state of thinking. To gain all things, we must first gain a disciplined, orderly, constructive state of mind. Do you have a disciplined mind? Have you any dominating appetite? Are you emotional? Do you vent your feelings through impatience, temper, malice, hate, pride, envy, conceit, lies, dishonesty, and the like? Any of these negations, as named, if controlling your thoughts, will delay good from coming to you. Anything in life that dominates us, makes us a servant to it, dictates to us. All our weaknesses and our lacks are due to some compelling influence that binds us and keeps us from what we naturally would receive if we were free in mind to receive them. Man, being the creator of nature, is endowed with the power to overcome all these mistakes, all the evil forces. The power is unfailing in its operation. Now, when used properly, one can master any trial. Nature has no problems she cannot solve. She has no troubles she cannot remove. All her movements are governed by the law of order and discipline. Man can say and do the same if he will pattern after nature. But first note, nature takes no chances. There are no ifs and ands or buts. Her forces operate under a law. If a stone is thrown up into the air, it falls back to the ground again. The law says so. Thoughts in our minds are governed by the law with the same exactness. Mind is the source and cause of conditions in our lives. Hence, it is here that we start to adjust and discipline our thoughts in order to stabilize our affairs. The fact that every problem is mental is another reason why we must learn to control our thoughts to determine our lives. But is our problem mental? Let's take a look. If we desire to gain wealth, we find that it is not a place nor an environment. If so, all people in one city would be rich, and the people in another city would be poor. Wealth is not the result of saving or thrift. Many penurious people are poor while free spenders are rich. Wealth is not due to any certain business, for men or women in the same business are poor and rich alike. It is something within the mind of the person that makes the wealth, and that something in the mind of the person is the quality and type of thoughts that they entertain. Look at nature again. We see that she has every movement well organized. A cut flower soon wilts and dies because it has been taken away from the source of life. If a dog jumps off a barn roof, he lands with a thud and suffers pain for his act. Instinct warns the dog not to take advantage of nature. Does the hungry lion in the jungle roar and lash in an effort to find his prey? Instinct warns the lion to be quiet, to steal carefully upon his prey, to stalk his meal. Have you ever observed how the cat will patiently wait for hours for the mouse? These are samples of organized action that is instinctive in any animal. This instinct must be adhered to by man. This is the organized method and the constructive method. A disorganized method would be destructive and negative. Man must stalk success or any worthwhile enterprise similar to the lion who stalks his meal. Man must work himself up to gain success. He does not fall into it. Just to roar or to shout his statements is not enough. Birds of $1 will not fall out of trees, though through fright, they will more likely fly away. When our ideas are organized, they're under our control. That is, our thoughts are so arranged that they work together as a single unit. Our minds must be controlled in their expressions so that every process of thought will be in an orderly fashion. All action is the result of thought. It determines the conditions of life. And to have better conditions of life, we must first make efforts to organize our thoughts. We wish to gain the best in life, but we do not know how to think correctly. The average person thinks at random. He has no clear design in his mind to which he can frame his thoughts. If he has a design, he does not direct his daily efforts towards it. Most of his thinking is beyond control, chaotic and unorganized. This is why disappointment and failure are always near, for they thrive on indecision. Now think about that. He says this is why disappointment and failure are always near. They thrive on indecision. We attract only what we think or create. This is the law of thinking. To achieve success, we must think it, we must work it, and we must become it. To advance, we must make some effort to rise. To obtain happiness, we must adapt our lives to the law of harmony and order. To rise above any limitation, we must organize our thinking along constructive lines. If man wishes to climb a hill, he doesn't sit down at the base of it and pray to the good Lord to lift him, hoping that the Lord will pick him up bodily and carry him to the top or give him a pair of wings to fly. The natural thing he does is first to organize his thought. He decides he's going to climb the hill, and then he starts to climb. He climbs steadily, keeping his eye ever on the top. He may find another picking out of a better trail. He may wind up around. He may slip back a step or two. He may even fall. He may have to stop and rest and regain his strength. But he keeps his thoughts collected and his desire intent upon reaching the top. And if he does that, he will eventually get there. A woman wanted to dispose of her home. She couldn't understand what was the delay, and for her answer, she had been praying, she said, for some time. I asked her, "What do you do towards working with the law? Tell me what you did yesterday." Well, first she prepared breakfast for her family. Then she got her children off to school. Then she said she always spent 30 minutes with her silence and her reading. After that, she called Mrs. Jones onto the phone, and they had a lengthy chat. But it was of little importance. Then it was time to prepare lunch. After lunch, her neighbor called her out to see the garden, and she stood and talked over the fence for more than an hour. But I asked, "What did you do in between these incidents?" "Oh," she replied, "whatever came to my notice that had to be done. I was busy all the time, but somehow," she added, "I have never liked housework." Where did she fail? First of all, She lacked discipline in her mind except where others demanded it. Her husband demanded it, the school demanded it, and she got breakfast for the children off to school on time. You didn't make any effort towards selling your house, I stated. You thought 30 minutes in silence would do it instead of organizing your time and work. You did just whatever came along. Her housework controlled her. She did not control her time or her work. She saw the truth. She went back home and each day thereafter outlined her work mentally. If she talked with a friend or a neighbor, it was just for a definite time, not any length of time. Each day, her work was planned so that she would accomplish something toward preparing to sell the house. Several weeks later, a letter came to me in which this woman stated that the house had been sold at a good price, and she added, "Do you know, I really love my work now. When the day is done, I have accomplished so much more, and I am not nearly as tired as before. I am teaching my children to be orderly thinkers." Do you do just whatever comes along? Do you plan your day that something definite will be accomplished towards your aim, your ambition? One type of people we call drifters, the latter we call builders. A president of an automobile company whose output of cars was 76,000 last year put out more than 1.5 million. How did he do it? Each day he carefully planned the work so that steadily his organization was becoming more disciplined and cooperative until they worked as a single unit. He said when interviewed, he planned more than the job required, so he was always assured of reaching his goal. Whether he knew it or not, he was in tune with the law of orderly thinking. If we have any problems, it is because we are not controlling our ideas. Nature has no problems because she is orderly and disciplined. Self-control consists of an organized thought direction. That is, we start out with a well-defined aim or objective, think toward it continuously, not just for 30 minutes, plan our time and work so that we are working steadily toward the goal. We fill our day full of constructive duties, that there is no room for idle chatter or waste of any kind to enter in. This development will enable us to move steadily upward toward success. When all things in harmony and order, problems will cease to be perplexities, and mysteries will cease to be mysteries. Knowledge and understanding will supplant fear and ignorance, and that which was invisible will become visible. That which was unknown will become known. Life with its circumstances is no longer an enigma, but a clear interpretation of the law of thinking. We are what we are according to the state of our thinking. We attract only what we think or create.
Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind podcast. And if you like what you heard and you want to know more, go to davidnagel.com/free stuff.